Welcome to the No Sitting on the Sideline Dad podcast, a podcast about a journey of discovery and conversations about not sitting on the sideline of life. Let's get involved. Here's host Joe Foley.
Hey, on the podcast, my guest, Wayne Van Der Wal, author of the book, The Gospel of Santa Claus, inspired by a true story about St. Nicholas. Wayne's also a dad. Welcome to the podcast, Wayne.
Hey, how are you? Good to hear from you and see you, Joe.
You know, it's one thing I really want to ask, because I kind of get to know you a little bit. I always like to answer an intro question. And it's the Christmas season, and Christmas just came about, and I can tell you mine, but I'd like to hear yours. What is a memory of your when you were a kid growing up, like, Christmas is on the way, something like happened, like a parade or some kind of event. What was yours, memories?
It's interesting you ask that because just recently, an early memory came to me when I was 5 years old, one of my earliest memories. And it was Christmas Eve. I was sick as a dog and throwing up the whole everything. And I remember my mom having it on the radio where they were listening to Santa, Santa's over England, heading to America, that kind of thing. And, but I was just too sick. I couldn't stay up, couldn't listen to it. And so I just went to bed. And that next morning, I woke up healed. Feeling perfect, like I'd never been sick at all. And I just remember thinking, I was 5, so I didn't know a lot about a lot at the time, but I remember somehow connecting, feeling better to the manger that my mom had in the living room. They had a real nice manger set with real hay, and I remember every once in a while just kind of staring at the little baby Jesus. And I remember that morning somehow just staring at that little baby and making the connection. That's my first, one of my earliest memories, but then also probably my first memory of God, or first thought of God, making the connection that, wow, he had something to do with me feeling better that Christmas morning. And what's interesting is why I connect that. It never hit me all the years I was writing my book. I originally was writing the book just for me and my kids, so I was having fun with it, using their names and my name and other people's names that we know. And the character that I assigned to me in the book was a little 5-year-old boy named Wayne. Mm-hmm. And I never made that connection. I just wrote it, but then that memory didn't come back to me until this last year. So anyway, that's my earliest recollection, or one of my most memorable anyway.
It's interesting. Mine is the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. Once that's over and you see Santa Claus come down, it kind of kicks off the season for me. And in the sense that it's like, that, when you're a little kid, you believe in Santa Claus and he's coming soon. That brings my memory into Christmas time.
I guess I didn't really answer your question, but yeah, that would for sure definitely be something for me, because we did have the parade on every Thanksgiving morning, and I'd sit and watch all the, especially loved all the balloons, the big giant balloons. Mm-hmm. And I'm right there with you as far as gearing up for the season.
And there's also, I remember I had a great aunt that she was a nun, and she always take us every Christmas time. I remember to the church. She was one of the parishes she belonged to. I don't know how that works when it comes to nuns, which one they belong to, which one they don't belong to. But we went to the church, and we always brought, at the time I didn't realize this is for people who in need, but we always brought, they had a manger in the chapel below, and we used to bring underwear or socks and leave them on the manger. And after that, we'd walk over to the local cab company. I was young, and all we had was cabs. Didn't have Uber and Lyft back then. Okay. And we bring donuts to the cab drivers, because my grandma lived right in front of them. So it was always nice, because she was, it was just kind of cool. It was one of my favorite person. I was just thinking about that, about something like that. And you can understand that, relate to that. And that reminded me of Christmas. And I think I just posted a picture today about celery salt. She loved celery salt. Cause I was thinking about it. One for Christmas and one because I was going to the cabinet look for pepper and I saw celery salt. And I brought back memories because she likes celery salt on her hot dogs and mustard. I remember that. And she played the piano. She always played Christmas music.
Wow.
So a lot of memories. I mean, and see, that's what Christmas time is. Memories, family time, family and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
I know that we can relate to because we're also a divorce. I'm a divorced dad. You're a divorced dad too yourself. And what was that experience like for you for your first Christmas being a divorced dad?
Yeah, as you know, that's tough. Your whole family's broken apart. Your world's turned upside down, and that year for me it was 2008. Worst year ever for me. And the holiday season rolled around. I was disillusioned with the materialism of Christmas at that point. And during that year, one of the biggest prayers in the world is to God is help. And so I prayed that a lot during that year. And so I really dug deep in my faith. And by that Christmas, I was really praying to God to help me make the season more meaningful for my kids and myself. And so I started doing some more research as far as what the season was about, the meaning behind Christmas, of course, the birth of Jesus, and who Santa Claus was. And I always knew there was a connection between Santa and St. Nicholas, but I didn't really know much about it. And so when I researched St. Nicholas, I was blown away on what an incredible story he had. It was so inspiring. And so that learning about St. Nick and sharing his story with my children that first Christmas really changed us internally and externally how we celebrated Christmas. And I sat down with them, I shared with them the story, and they took it in. They were 8 and 11 at the time, but they still embraced the story as far as who he was and what he was all about. And it was so much more than just a jolly old guy who gave presents. So that first Christmas, learning about him, one thing I shared with the kiddos is that I'm not about things, I'm about doing. And I much rather do than have. And so one thing we changed was having fewer presents. One, financially I was hit hard, so that was minimal. And so I changed, we just did less presents.
What about St. Nicholas? You mentioned about that and the history behind that and your kids with Christmas. How that relate?
Well, I just share a little with what I learned about St. Nicholas, and that will help understand why we did what we did and the changes we made. Yeah, because it was a tough time. We were hurting. We're handling it well. But we had two choices. I had two choices at that point. When you go through a divorce, get bitter or get better. And I chose better. So I was digging deeper in my faith, and I was being positive, and I was loving on my kids, and I was seeking out to make the season more meaningful. So when I learned about St. Nicholas, I'll just share some background real quick, is he was born in 270 AD, so a couple of centuries after Jesus was around. Mm-hmm. So still pretty fresh. Christianity was still young. He was born in the country called Lycia at the time, which is today known as Turkey. So if you met St. Nicholas today, he'd be Turkish. Mm-hmm. And it was so they were a Christian family, but they were in Lycia, which was a Greek culture, and they were ruled by the Roman Empire. Okay. So if you can just imagine what it was like then to be a Christian in a Greek society with Greek gods, ruled by Romans with Roman gods, it was a very diverse and interesting time for sure. And then for his family, Nicholas's family, his parents, he was the only child to be, they were wealthy. Just kind of blows my mind that how you could be wealthy Christians in a society like that. But they were. And so they raised him as a Christian. His uncle was named Nicholas. He was a bishop in the church as well. And so that was his namesake. So they raised him as a Christian, but then his parents tragically died when he was young in the plague. So they passed away, and so he inherited their fortune. And from there, he felt led by God to give it all away to the poor, the sick, and the suffering. And he felt called by God to devote his life to God. And so he later became a priest and a bishop in the church. Now, at that time, when he was born, the Roman Empire was not real strong. They kept going through emperor after emperor. They kept getting killed or dying. They finally got an emperor called Diocletian, who helped restore the Roman Empire back to their glory, which wasn't really good for the Christians because he would use Christians as a scapegoat. So anytime anything bad went with the empire, he blamed Christians for not worshiping their gods. And then he got powerful, so powerful that he proclaimed himself as a god. And so he expected everybody to bow and kneel to him and worship him. And of course, the Christians wouldn't do that. And so he persecuted the Christians. He proclaimed edicts against the Christians. He burned down churches, tortured Christians, especially Christian leaders, and imprisoned them. And so St. Nicholas was not immune to any of that. So he was put in prison. He was in prison for 5 years. So Santa, as we know him, has done time in the big house. And so those are just some fascinating things, about his life. And so how that affected my children and I at that time was learning about the real Santa Claus, St. Nicholas, and that he was a real person, and he experienced some suffering in his life. Just like going through a divorce is the death of a marriage, and you go through the grieving process. Here, St. Nicholas, he lost his parents when he was young, so he had to go through the grieving process. So he knows grief and loss and pain of losing loved ones. And then later on, he became, he was persecuted for his faith and hated, so he knows dislike and persecution and rejection. And so, being able to connect with him in that way, in a more personal way than just being a jolly old guy that gives presents, and knowing that he suffered all that, but he overcame it all with his faith, allowing God to do a work in his heart. And he received God's forgiveness and love and grace and mercy. And then he was able to turn around and extend that to all the people in his life, even his persecutors, extending love and grace and mercy, and also, filling people with joy and hope, peace. And so those were all real inspiring things. So that first Christmas, what we ended up doing, what I tried to portray to my kids is, let's focus more on, let's become more God-centered, let's become more family-centered, and let's become more other-centered and less self-centered. And so that's what we strove to do. So, we remembered that it was Jesus' birthday first and foremost, that God sent Jesus to save us. Humankind is infected with terminal illness, a deadly disease called sin, and the wages of sin is death. And so here we are infected with this illness, but that's what Christmas is all about, is that God sent his only son to become the sacrificial Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Yes. And so let's focus on that and remember that first and foremost. Then let's become more family-centered. So we started doing more family-oriented activities more than ever before. The cuddling, watching Christmas shows, watching movies, doing some crafts, making ornaments, baking together and eating together, and going out to parades and festivals and church functions and school Christmas plays and all kinds of stuff. Anything we could find in the at home or in our area, to do that was family oriented and fun and added meaning, just like, you talked about some of your memories with your grandma. And so God-centered, family-centered, and then other-centered. So we would do Operation Shoebox, and fill the shoeboxes, a few shoeboxes full. We'd each get one and go shopping and fill it up with goodies and school supplies and all kinds of fun stuff. And we'd collect all the stuff that we wanted to give away, that we haven't used in the past year, and go do that as a donation. And then my kids at that point were 8 and 11, so they're already past the believing in Santa Claus stage. And so what I shared with them, it's like a rite of passage. Okay, once you discover Santa isn't real, then we become Santa. And so it's their turn to become Santa to other people, and to do fun things for other people, to give gifts, and to do it in secret. So leaving cookies on other people's doors, on the neighbors' doors, or shoveling someone's driveway, or raking some leaves, or doing something. And so that's how things changed a big way for us that first Christmas, and thereafter. That's where we placed our focus.
It sounds like it helped you, especially you, getting through the tough times. I mean, divorce can be very tough and emotionally draining. And to focus on something positive, especially with the kids at Christmas, doing the stuff you did, and also your faith and believing in the God and stuff like that, it helped you through. I know as a dad myself, I went through it, and my first Christmas was, I didn't have my son for first Christmas, and it was not a fun experience. So I will leave it at that. I won't go into depth with it. It wasn't a fun experience.
Yes.
But doing the positive things, I think, helps healing.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's so easy to, have a pity party and feel sorry for ourselves. And so that's why it's so important to engage. It's alone time's good. It's important to have that time to reflect and rethink things and think about how we do things different in the future and learn from our experiences, for sure. But it's important to go out and have that fellowship with friends and with family, and get out of ourselves and be there for other people. That's part of the grieving process. The grieving, you have shock, denial, anger, sadness, and then eventually you get to acceptance. But for me, there's another step right after all that, and it's service. Once you've healed, and part of your healing is getting out of yourself and serving others and touching others and blessing others. And it can only help pull us out of the sadness and pity party that we can find ourselves in.
Well, interesting. When I'm thinking about you talking about that, and I'm thinking about St. Nicholas.
Yeah.
Well, what are some two things that you learned by all the research you've done?
Man, there's a whole book full of it. Let me just say real quick, just with the book was really a part of my healing process. One thing that is very therapeutic is to journal, for people to get put down on paper, get it out of their head, whatever they're mulling over, or their pain, or whatever they're dealing with, and get it out of their head and on paper. There's some therapeutic about journaling. And so here I am. I'm a visual person, so as I was learning about St. Nicholas, the story actually started forming in my head as a movie. And I can't go out and make a movie, but I can write the scenes down. And so I just started writing the scenes down as I thought of them. So I just started the process of writing the book over 7 years. And over those 7 years, I was going through a healing process. And so there's a lot of, little things that I can see in the book that maybe the reader might not know was going on, but they'll see it in Nicholas's life or in one of the characters' lives that they were going through. Maybe an example is money. So money became tighter for me, going from 2 incomes to 1 income. And so one thing with Nicholas being a Christian and tithing and being generous to others, that impacted me. I was already tithing at that point as a Christian, but it became even more powerful and significant to realize why I'm tithing and why God wants us to tithe. It's kind of a heart check, to see when I write that check every month, where's my heart as far as money goes? Am I being greedy and self-serving, or am I recognizing that, it's really God's money ultimately, and that I'm to use it for good and not for selfish purposes. And of course, he wants to bless us and have a good time, but he wants us to be wise stewards of money. And so that's something, learning about Nicholas and recognizing where he was at. And as far as materialism, it's ironic. Here he was wealthy and chose to give it all away and do away with wealth and materialism. And here, if he were here today, he'd be shocked that his image is portrayed as this kind of the center of materialism, and which is sad. And so I think that's part of what I want to do in the book. Nothing wrong with presents and giving. It's a trait of God. God gave us the greatest gift of all, and we can't help when God gives us gifts. We want to share those gifts with others, but it's just one is taken to the extreme. So anyway, just finances, money, and being a wise steward was one lesson that really impacted me, and really God blessed me through that. Through tithing and being generous, even when times were tough for me. He blessed me to where, over the years, I got raises at my job and cars paid off, and different things to where I'm financially stable and well off, today, and so thankful for that. And another thing I got out of the learning about St. Nicholas's life is just his devotion to God, and how he really practiced God's presence. That it wasn't just a go to church on Sunday and punch my time clock in, that I did my hour on Sunday and then didn't think about God after that. God was always with him, and he was always seeking God. It was a daily thing, just like the Jews in the desert after God freed them from Egypt, and they were wandering out in the desert, and he gave them manna to eat. Manna came from the sky, but he didn't give them a month's supply. Or
what is manna?
Manna was, I'm trying to remember, it was like a milky bread substance that they would wake up the next morning and it would just be everywhere, and they would collect it and eat it. So the point with all that is that he counted on God. They had expectations of God. They sought God out daily for their daily bread or daily manna. He didn't just give it to them for a week or a month, and then they would just not worry about it and not engage with him and not think twice about him, until they needed more manna. It was a daily thing, and so a daily relationship. And so, to me, that's something I learned from Nicholas, is that just like any relationship, in a marriage, if you don't talk to a person except once a week, it's not going to be much of a marriage or a relationship. And so, if we're going to have a relationship with God like Nicholas did, it's a daily thing. It's an hourly thing. God's with us all the time. Jesus was called Emmanuel on Christmas, which means God with us. And so that was the whole point, that when Jesus came, he came to reconcile us back to God. And God is with us all the time through Jesus. And so to build and foster that relationship, that personal relationship with God, was huge for me. And I was doing it to a certain extent up to that time. But then, Nicholas's life really impacted me that way, to really dig deeper, just really press into the presence of God daily, meditating on his word, the Bible. Words are thoughts expressed. And so here we have God's word, the Bible. So these are God's thoughts expressed in the Bible. And so to really hunger and thirst for his word and his truth, it was just powerful. I mean, the Bible is the owner's manual to life. And so it just gave so much more purpose and meaning and direction for me.
Well, then, what an interesting question, because you're saying Nicholas. That's one. That's the version we're talking about, Santa Claus. But it seems like everybody has a different version of him too. I don't know if if past that when you're researching for the book. There's many different versions, and I'm wondering how did he get the red suit? Did you figure that out through your research?
That's a good question. Historically, it's interesting because, again, he was a bishop in the church, and the bishop robe was red. And I think it is still today, but historically, it was a red robe. And so, over the centuries, for that to hold on to, modern day is pretty amazing. Of course, he eventually got pants, and that's something I touch on in the book. It's a fun little thing that one of the fun traditions I added to the book, and I didn't do away with anything. It was great. I got an email today from a woman. I don't know her, but she sent me an email. She said, "You know what? I love Santa Claus. I always have, and I love Jesus, and I always have. And Wayne, in your book, you brought the two together so beautifully. I love it," is what she said. And that just really touched me, because that's what I tried to do. I didn't do away with the traditions of Santa Claus that we celebrate today, because a lot of families will still keep that tradition through Christmas Eve. And so I didn't do away with any of that, but I just added more meaning to it by connecting Jesus with Santa Claus or St. Nicholas and what the holiday was all about. And so that's one of the fun things I did was, how he morphed from a red robe to red pants. And so historically he had a red robe, the bishop's robe, and somehow in the 18th century, when Santa Claus really morphed here in America during that century, starting with Washington Irving out of New York in 1809, and he wrote the history of New York and Santa. He wrote some images of Santa, and then Clement Moore in 1823 wrote A Visit from St. Nicholas. We know that today is 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, but the original title is A Visit from St. Nicholas. He added even more imagery to Santa Claus, and then by the 1880s, a political cartoonist named Thomas Nast took some of their characteristics and added it more to it. To really, that's who the Santa that we know today, as far as in the American culture goes.
Well, it's one thing in this I'd like to talk a little bit about your book. I mean, it has different chapters. Obviously, it's a book. It has different chapters. But one thing I liked, I'm chapter 8, Rite of the Confirmation, and let me get to the back of the book here.
Okay, that was the other night's devotion, I think.
And it has a devotion.
Yeah.
It gives a whole a few paragraphs of devotion, and then I like how you did that and had the question of consider. I mean, and then you got a few Bible verses. That's a pretty interesting way after telling a story or a chapter, and then a question that somebody can ponder on. I really like how you did that.
Yeah, thanks. I just wrote it out as a novel. When I was going through the editing process, I had one of my pastors read it, and he said, "You know what, Wayne, I would like this. I'd like to see you do this as devotions, where I could read it with my grandkids every night, and before Christmas." And so I love that idea. So what I ended up doing was splitting the book up into 30 chapters to be read the 30 days before Christmas. It's a historical novel. It can be read any time of year. But if somebody chooses to read it before the holidays, they could read it for the 30 days before Christmas and as a devotion each night. And so it wasn't until right before I was going to publishing this last year that I felt God put it on my heart to do devotions, to do actual devotions, not just leave the chapters as devotions, but to have some questions at the end and some scripture and a little prayer to help go deeper with the content of that chapter. And so I went back and I'd read a chapter and I'd just say, God, what are you speaking to me about? What could I learn from this? And so that was pretty much me just going through and just God showing me what he's teaching me or what he had taught me over those years of writing. So, as we were talking about earlier, how it affected me or how it impacted me, it was really it took me 7 years to write, and it was a 7-year process. So a lot of those end of chapter devotions were what God was working on me at that time, as far as a life lesson goes.
That's very interesting. I mean, I can relate to that with the podcast, and that's what my recovery through the divorce process is, doing this podcast. Really what it is.
Yeah.
So you're writing the book, me doing the podcast,
Absolutely.
and the process and going through the grieving process and all the steps you do through a divorce.
Absolutely.
Wrapping up, I want to give final thoughts. Anybody can leave about Christmas. Somebody can leave about Christmas.
I'm really feeling this holiday season, and I'm so thankful for, is really thankfulness. I'm just so thankful that Thanksgiving comes a month before Christmas, because thankfulness is so powerful. It really helps us get our head and our heart together and in the right place, as far as just really helps give us rose-colored glasses when you think about it. And I like to call it practicing thanks living. That when you're living thankfully and just trying to find as many things to be thankful for every day, man, it just changes the perspective on your outlook on life, and really just kind of softens if you're walking around with a chip on your shoulder or feeling edgy. When you practice thankfulness, it really just takes the edge off. And to have Thanksgiving open the doorway into the Christmas season, and to go through December with thankful hearts as much as we can. And I'm speaking this to you. I'm really talking about where I'm at and what I'm going through, is even more than ever practicing thankfulness, and even little things, just silly things like a piece of chocolate or someone held a door open for me, or just there's so many little things that you could think of. You could constantly go through the day being thankful, and when we do that, that's what I've been practicing over this last week. Man, it really just brings joy. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. I just feel more jolly, and so I guess that's what I just want to share with everyone else, is this season, just really practice thanks living more than ever. If there's families out there, do it as a family, and do it with your family. See how many things you can think of sitting around the dinner table to be thankful for. Just keep going around and around, and even little things. It doesn't have to be, thankful for, a house or whatever. It can be, but that's a challenge. Just practice thanks living, and I think it'll make all our seasons brighter, make the Christmas season brighter for all of us.
All the links will be in the show notes. Wayne, thank you very much for being on the podcast today.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Joe, and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you for listening to the podcast. Please subscribe to the newsletter to receive updates of the show and helpful and useful tips. This has been a production of Foley 42 Media.